Hey, quite a few people here. Are we waiting for a certain number to join?
Yeah, we'll wait for 5 minutes because they are just finishing a class and then trying to rejoin.
Ah,
Yeah.
They had a class till 2:50,
right,
so we
right.
have to give some breathing time for them to come back.
Zoom classes. Yeah, I forgot that everything is online.
Online,
Yeah.
everything is online, virtual.
It's quite difficult to do these things.
Mm.
Has the college completely transitioned to virtual learning then?
Yeah, definitely. We are actually closed also, no? Maybe you would have heard,
Yes,
okay,
yes.
Bangalore and Karnataka is under lockdown
Mhm.
for almost now. I think they extended yesterday for 15 more days. So
Yeah.
since 4 weeks, we are under lockdown.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, it's quite bad there. Fully
Yeah,
against Chase.
situation is slightly on the higher side in the sense, not so good side.
Mm. Yeah,
So
understood.
they're trying to control the cases via this stringent measures, restricting people movement, gatherings, and vaccination. Challenges are there at the hospitals. Healthcare is a system that is taking all the toll.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's a bit overwhelmed at the moment. Are they vaccinating normal citizens already?
You are not very audible.
Have they already started vaccinating the
Yeah, yeah,
students?
yeah, 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 yeah.
Oh,
Many
that's
of us have got in that first dose.
ah, okay.
Okay, of course, 45 plus. There was a privilege and then the priority.
Uh-huh.
Of course, healthcare workers and then frontline. All those people have all got vaccinated. They've opened up for the 18, but they have run out of the stock, so they are now gearing up, and probably maybe in a 15 days time things may improve, and then hopefully the
Mm.
plan is by July end or June end everybody should be, at least first dose should be done.
Oh, okay. That's good to
So on a
hear.
war footing they are trying that, but inherent challenges are always there.
Yeah, definitely.
Numbers are very very huge, am I right?
Yes, unfortunately. Hard to vaccinate.
Singapore's population is equivalent to Bangalore's population, maybe. Am I?
Yeah, it is. I actually checked once. It's about the
Yeah.
same. Yeah. I mean,
So
yeah, here also they're vaccinating very slowly, so it's understandable.
slowly,
Yeah, yeah, they're quite slow.
uh,
But what to do? Just have to
but you
wait.
all got vaccinated.
I did, but that was because my lab's affiliated with the hospital. We're
Okay.
situated within a hospital, so we got it done with the healthcare members because they wanted to make sure there's no cross contamination. So everyone in my building got vaccinated.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was lucky to do it quite early on. So
Mm.
we're still waiting for the rest of my friends who don't work in any affiliation to hospitals still haven't gotten vaccinated, so they're waiting.
Are they manufacturing or they are depending on other countries
They're importing because
importing?
they're doing Pfizer and Moderna here, so everything's imported,
Okay.
stored at -80. Yeah.
That is also two dose or a single?
Both two doses, 21 days apart.
Okay.
Yes. 45 people. I was quite surprised at the number of
Is it?
students. It's
Ma'am,
good to know that they're
hello
ready to
ma'am,
school.
this is Shivam from final year P
Yes,
Biotech.
sure.
Ma'am, you mentioned about Dr. Molay Ghosh, ma'am, he's from IIT Kharagpur, right?
Yes, that's right. He's from IIT
Ma'am,
Kharagpur.
I
Now
think,
he's
ma'am, he's shifted from IIT Kharagpur, ma'am, because one of my senior friend from Kolkata itself, I'm from West Bengal, ma'am. Even he did his
uh-huh.
internship like 3 years or 4 years back. Then after that, he told that he shifted to Bhubaneswar something, materials and material science. I
Sorry,
don't know.
are you talking about the like?
Dr.
Are you
Molay,
saying
Dr.
he was
Molay Ghosh.
originally he was in Zomator? I don't know if he's left his
Ma'am, you
building.
mentioned about he's from IIT Kharagpur, right? I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
He's shifted to where?
Ma'am, he's currently he's doing something in last time when I spoke to my friend, he said some materials and material science. All this.
Are you talking? It's a common name. Are you sure we're talking about the same person? Because he's a
No,
Biologist.
ma'am.
biologist. So he doesn't
Yes,
do.
ma'am. Maybe you just mentioned because I heard about him from my friend. That's why. I just
I've spoken recently to Malloy, and he still adds Motor because he's still responding from the company emails. I think you're mixing it up with a different Malloy coach. I
okay.
think it's
Maybe.
common
I'm
common name.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Ankurina, you were there at IIT, am I right? IIT Kharagpur.
Yes, Kharagpur as well.
Mm.
Yes.
So your contact with Malay Ghosh is not from IIT Kharagpur.
No, Malay is actually he's quite a few years my senior.
Yeah.
It was just a happy coincidence. I submitted my application directly to Zomator, and he knew where I was from, but we didn't really know
Okay.
each other. But yeah, I think it's a different person. He's still with Zomator. I checked.
Mm.
Yeah.
Maybe same name. Coincidence. Shivam.
Yeah.
Identity.
Yeah, sir.
Common.
Yeah. Because when ma'am told about him, I just like I got a strike in my mind because my friend
Maybe
also
two
told
people
about
with
this.
same name. Yes.
Yes, that does happen.
Can we start, Rashmi madam?
Yes, sir, we can start. We have 50 members.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Great. So,
I'll just briefly welcome Madam Ankurina. We are very, very proud and happy that our proud alumnus Ankurini Sharma is amidst us. Good evening, friends. Ankurina was our illustrious students of the Department of BE Biotechnology for during the years 2009 to 13 at MBIT. Further to that, in order to pursue her MTech, she went to IIT Kharagpur for the Master of Technology in Biotechnology and Biochemical Engineering, where she fared exceedingly well, and that interest pursued her to join a company where she joined Zomator Biologics, as she was mentioning, at the cell and molecular biology team. For an year, she had a stint, and then, in order to upgrade her knowledge, talent, and skills, she moved on to University of Singapore, National University of Singapore, for her PhD. And we are very happy to mention that she has successfully submitted her PhD, and then the defense, which I feel will be more like a formality because of her good work and quality publications that she has. She will be Dr. Ankurina Sharma in weeks' time. And she's a research scholar as of now, studying natural killer cells and the development of biosimilars using a mammalian expression platform. And her skills include high parameter flow cytometry, immune functional assays, cytotoxicity and cytokine production, protein expression, purification, modification, and characterization. She is also proficient in cell and molecular biology techniques, and a very good communicator and an orator, experienced lab mentor, and a teaching assistant. Such an illustrious alumnus has responded to our invitation and amidst us to inspire all of us. Thank you, Ankurina. Over to you.
Thanks so much. I'm just going to share screen right now. Before I begin, can I just confirm that everyone can see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
So only thing, your volume is still on the lower side.
Okay.
I don't know whether it is for me, for all of us, all of you.
Should I speak louder?
Better.
Okay. All right. Great. Can I begin now?
Yeah, please.
All right. Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Ankurina. Sorry, it's a bit. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I heard a background noise. Okay, sorry, beginning again. My name is Ankurina. I'm basically going to discuss a little bit about my PhD research and provide you with a general background of what it is like to develop biosimilars, and also a little bit of background on checkpoint inhibitors for immune cells. So I'll explain all the terms as we go on. Just a bit of background, which I don't have to go over again. I studied in MVIT, went over to Kharagpur, and then moved to Singapore. I'm part of a group known as the Life Sciences Immunology Core, which is affiliated with the Center of Life Sciences. And my primary work is in natural killer cells. So before I dive right into the research, I'm going to talk about natural killer cells for a bit because they're not very popular. Most immune studies tend to focus very heavily on T cells and B cells, but NK cells are very unique members of the innate immune system. So just as a background, they were originally discovered based on their ability to lyse tumor cells without any prior sensitization. That is, when it comes to T cells and B cells, you know that there is a concept where they have to be exposed to them first and then they develop a response, right? Which is their method of response. NK cells, on the other hand, when they were initially being discovered, when you bring NK cells in contact with tumor cells, they respond almost immediately. Hence, that earned them the name natural killers, right? And they subsequently got implicated in a number of different disease areas. They played a hugely important role in the initial response against infections. They've also been implicated in transplants and tumors. And also recently, there is a very strong role which has been discovered for natural killer cells in reproductive immunology as well. Now, why NK cells respond without any sensitization is because they respond based on two different types of receptors which are expressed on their surface. They are quite simply called activating receptors and inhibitory receptors. Now, activating receptors, as the name suggests, they turn NK cells off. They basically recognize stress-induced ligands on other cells, or maybe cells which are expressing infectious ligands, and the activating receptors send the signal to turn on the NK cell and then respond against the targets. Now, inhibitory receptors are the opposite. Inhibitory receptors actually turn off the NK cell response, and they recognize constitutively expressed markers of cells. Now, how would I clarify what that term means? They're basically antigens which are expressed on all of your nucleated cells. These are called human leukocyte antigens. And what they do is they tell the NK cell not to kill that particular cell because it is a cell that is a self cell, right? So activating turns on, inhibitory turns off. And what happens is the natural killer cell response, which you can see over here on the left, is very dependent on the balance that it receives between the activating and inhibitory receptor signals. What this means is an easy analogy to think of is sort of accelerators and brakes, okay? Just keep that in mind and I'll talk about it. So where a natural killer cell encounters a healthy cell, what happens is there's usually a balance in signals. It receives some activating signals, some inhibitory signals, but it overall works out as a balance. So there's no response against healthy cells. So if your natural killer cell comes in contact with any cells in your body as it's traveling through your lymphatic system, it's not going to respond against healthy cells because there's a balance between signals. Now, suppose an NK cell encounters an infected cell if you have some sort of infection. What happens is infected cells tend to express a lot of activating ligands on their surface. So this means that the activating signal goes up. And activating signals are like accelerators. They basically turn on the NK cell until they lyse the target cell. So they overwhelm the inhibitory signal and then they lyse the target cell. Now the opposite also happens. Suppose an NK cell is wandering around the body and unfortunately there is a cancer cell there. A lot of cancer cells do this unique thing where they downregulate the expression of human leukocyte antigens on their surface as an immune escape mechanism. They want to try and escape from T cells and B cells. But what happens when they do this is that they can't escape NK cells because the NK cell comes in contact with the cancer cell and the inhibitory ligand is gone, which means there's no inhibitory signal anymore. And this is the equivalent of turning off the brakes in the car. Now suddenly the NK cell has no inhibition, it has only activation, and the NK cell lyses the target cell. This phenomenon is unique to NK cells and it's called the missing self response. Basically, it's a response wherein the NK cell will kill a target cell which has lost the expression of HLA class 1 proteins. Hence, it's missing a marker of self or the missing self response, right? And its main function is the identification of tumors or infections which downregulate HLA molecules as an immune escape mechanism. And it does this through different receptors like the killer cell immunoglobulin receptors and NKG2A, which you don't have to worry about right now. So my research primarily uses this missing self response to try and get the NK cell to respond against cancer cells which do express HLA class 1 molecule. So let's just go over the same figure again. So NK cell encounters healthy cell, balance between signals, no response, right? NK cell recognizes a cancer cell which downregulates HLA class 1 molecule, lyses cancer cell. But what happens if a cancer cell continues to express HLA ligands? The NK cell wouldn't be able to respond against it because it gets a nice balance between signals. So our concept, our basic idea is to generate a biosimilar protein which is identical to the one that is being expressed on the surface of the NK cell, which I've shown here in green, and then use that to block the NK cell's interaction with the target cell, which basically creates an artificial missing self response. I'm basically creating this situation where the NK cell is not able to receive any inhibiting signal from the target cell by the addition of a biosimilar protein. We call this the artificial missing self response. And this is a biosimilar which would subsequently stimulate the NK cell and lyse the target cell. And that is the basic logic of this project. So the protein that I have generated is called a killer cell immunoglobulin-like receptor. It's not important to know exactly what it does in terms of functionality. The main mechanism is the blocking of this inhibition between the NK cell and the target cell. So I generated this synthetic clear protein in a mammalian cell line. So initially I designed the protein. We did this by basically synthetically creating a protein which would be similar to the protein being expressed on the surface of the NK cell, but we chopped off the transmembrane domain to make it a soluble protein. We then included a signal peptide, a histidine tag, which is a hexahistidine tag which you use for purification purposes by nickel affinity chromatography, and an Avi tag. An Avi tag basically is a receiver site for biotinylation, and we use the Avi tag to modify the protein subsequently for our staining purposes. We express these proteins in two mammalian cell lines. CHO3E7 is a Chinese hamster ovary cell line, and HEC2936E is a human embryonic kidney cell line. We found that the HEC2936E worked better for us, and eventually all our proteins were synthesized in this. But both of these cell lines are quite excellent because the post-translational modification of the protein, which happens in these two cell lines, is quite identical to the ones that we see within a human being, and which is what we were going for because we were trying to make biosimilars, right? So we initially started off with two proteins, KIR2DL3 and KIR2DL1. We transfected a HEC2936E cell line with these two proteins, constructs expressing these two proteins, sorry. And then once we transfected them, we selected the transfectants using antibiotic selection. And we then stained the transfectants intracellularly. We basically wanted to check that the proteins being expressed were correctly folded, that they would bind to their complementary antibodies. So we did that using GL1A3, which is the antibody complementary to 2DL3, and EB6, which is the antibody complementary to 2DL1. Once we'd verified the identities, we then purified the proteins. So the proteins, like I said, I chopped the transmembrane domain. As a result, the protein was soluble and it was secreted because of the addition of a signal peptide. We purified this protein from the supernatant using nickel affinity chromatography. Since we had a His tag, the protein bound to the nickel column, and then we were able to purify it at a very high purity. As you can see, there's no contaminating bands in our protein. Once we did that, we then verified the post-translational modification of this protein using PNGS treatment. So the proteins that we're interested in are primarily glycosylated in terms of post-translational modification, not much else. So PNGS is an enzyme which digests end-linked glycoside bonds. And when we digested, we were able to verify that the only kind of modification that occurred was the right kind of glycosylation that we were expecting for the proteins. So we verified that the proteins were well expressed, they were well folded, they bound to their respective antibodies, they were correctly modified, and we were able to purify them at very high purity. Once we had this, we also generated target cell lines which express the receptor, the ligand, which is corresponding to this protein. So if you look here, right, the ligand that the cell usually expresses, the human leukocyte antigen, and for this protein and specifically HLA-C, we wanted to generate an artificial system which would express this ligand. So what we took is a K562 cell line, which is a cell line which does not express any HLA-A, B, or C, so it's an HLA null cell line, and we transformed it with the two HLA-C alleles, which are specific to our two cure proteins, and a HLA-B allele, which is supposed to be a negative control allele. So this is basically a reporter cell line. We wanted to make sure that our proteins correctly bound to and allowed the NK cells to respond against a target. So this is the reporter target cell line that we generated. So initially, when we tried to transfect, what happened was the K562 cell line that we had was very resistant to transfection. So what we had to do was transfect the cell line and sort it multiple times to make sure that we were able to generate transfectants which express the alleles that we required at very high densities. So you can see here, gray is the parental cell line threshold, which we've established. And then after that, once we transfected them, we have the fluorescence for both of the two alleles represented in red and blue, and we gradually sorted this until we expressed very high levels of the alleles on the surface of the transfected. We have the same done for the green control cell line as well, which is basically a negative control. The allele expressed on the surface of this cell line was not something that our proteins bind to, so we just had this as a control. Once we generated the target cells, I'm mainly going to discuss the immune functional assays. We did a bunch of staining as well, but for the purposes of this, I'm going to stick with immune functionality. So we then had to analyze the response of the NK cells against the target cells. And the preferred method that we use in our lab is a process called high parameter flow cytometry, which I will explain in upcoming slides. So just to discuss the workflow with you guys. Firstly, what we do is we isolate PBMCs from healthy donors. So we have blood banks and we have healthy donors who we isolate natural killer cells from because we want functional natural killer cells. So we isolate the peripheral blood mononuclear cells, which is PBMCs. We co-incubate the PBMCs with target cell lines, basically the cell lines that I generated over here and a few HLA null cell lines. Later, once we've confirmed experiments using these two target cell lines, we proceed to cancer cell lines as well to confirm that our NK cells are able to respond against cancer cell lines as well. We then stain this mixture of PBMCs and cell lines. We co-incubate this overnight, allow the NK cells to respond against the target cells. On the next day, we stain this mixture with an antibody cocktail to differentiate the immune cells in the mixture. We then stain this intracellularly as well. We basically treat the cells with a pore-forming mixture, which basically allows the cell surface pores to open and the antibody to permeate within the cell. So we have intracellular staining for interferon gamma. Interferon gamma is basically one of the ways an NK cell responds against a target cell. So the level of interferon gamma correlates with how much an NK cell will respond against a target cell. So we use that as our measure of functionality. And then we detect the staining by 12 parameter flow cytometry, and then we do a subset analysis of the NK repertoire. Now, flow cytometry is something that a vast majority of my project depended on. So I'm just going to discuss what it is and how it works, right? So the basic process of flow cytometry is it's a very high density evaluation of each cell that you pass through the machine. So what happens is a flow cytometer takes in your cell suspension and it passes it through a fluid called the sheath fluid, and it goes through a process called hydrodynamic focusing. In extremely simple terms, basically what it does is it puts the cells into a single line or a single file, and it allows the cells to go drop by drop where they are subsequently detected by a detector. So suppose I put in 1 million cells. What this machine is going to do is it's going to pass the cells through a fluid so that the the cells are in a line, and one by one, each cell in the million cells that I've put in here, it will analyze separately. And how it analyzes is by uh, passing a laser straight at the cell and then measuring the refraction of light based on the cell. So in the most simple terms, so if you have a cell, say, that comes here, passes oh, sorry. So if you have a cell here, it passes through the fluid, and then you have a single cell, right? And then the focused laser beam hits the cell. And what happens is, based on the way the light scatters, so when it hits the cell directly, based on the way the light scatters, we measure forward scatter. Forward scatter is basically a measure of how big your cell is. So the light hits here and it scatters in two different directions because the cell is quite large. And then when we measure it using a detector, the forward scatter tells you how big a cell is, right? That's the first measure. The second measure is called side scatter. That's a measure of the reflection. So the laser beam hits the cell and some of it also gets reflected away. This is called side scatter, and this depends on how dense the cell is. So a cell that's extremely dense will have a high side scatter, and if it's not very dense, it will have a low side scatter. This is basic optics, right? What's fascinating about flow cytometry, this is basic flow cytometry, forward scatter, side scatter. What we can do in our facility is this process called high parameter flow cytometry, wherein the machine is so advanced that not only does it measure forward and side scatter, it has a bunch of other lasers. In our lab, we have about 4, which can measure antibodies, fluorescent antibodies expressed on the surface of the cell as well. Now, these lasers are colored. So you have the red, green, blue, and I think ultraviolet laser. And basically, multiple lasers will flash beams of light very quickly at the cell as it passes through this channel. And what happens is you can measure. So you can measure the refraction of the light and you can measure which antibodies are expressed. So in each of these cells, if you can visualize it, I can put in almost 10 or 12 antibodies on the surface. And as long as each of them are conjugated with a different fluorophore, I can measure the expression of a bunch of different factors simultaneously. All of this happens in a microsecond. So it's very rapid laser light being directed towards it. And then based on the scatter, I can check the presence of this many different colors. It goes up to 12. The really advanced ones can do 16 and almost 20 colors at the same time. So it's a very high data heavy sort of analysis of cells. So bear with me. I know this looks complicated. The output looks something like this. Okay. So we start off over here, like I explained to you, the forward and the side scatter. So when I put in a mixture of cells, as I mentioned in my experiment, we have a mixture of PBMCs here. What will happen is you'll obtain a graph like this. In this graph, you have forward scatter on the x-axis, side scatter on the y-axis, pretty simple. Each dot that you see here is one event. So I've passed about, I want to say, 2 million cells through here, if I remember correctly, and each one of these dots is a single event. Based on what I know about lymphocytes, I know that they're a certain size based on their forward scatter, and I know that they're a certain density. So what I then do is I gate or I select these cells. I say lymphocytes are about this size and they're about this density. So that I select this many cells. You have to realize this is about 1 million cells. These cells off to the side over here are monocytes. I know this because they are very, very large and they're much more dense than lymphocytes. So I don't want monocytes. So I choose the lymphocytes, and then you have to realize this is a subset of this. So I've chosen the lymphocytes and I go here. Once I've chosen the lymphocytes, I select single cells because I don't want doublets. Doublets are basically cells that have stuck together. Their measurements are not very accurate. As simple as that. Once I've selected the single cells, I then want to exclude all the other components. Like I said, I study NK cells primarily. So what I did is I stained CD3, which is a marker of T cells, and CD14 is a marker of monocytes. So antibodies against CD3 and CD14 will identify T cells and monocytes. So I exclude those cells. So these cells are positive, these cells are negative. Basically, 2 groups emerged, right? I chose the negative cells. I also excluded any dead cells. So when I chose this subset, you have to realize subset, subset, subset. So I start off with about 1 million cells, reduce, reduce. So gotten rid of the T cells and monocytes. Then I get rid of the B cells. B cells express CD20 on their surface. So I stain the cells with CD20 as well. So I exclude based on CD20 expression. So these cells are negative for CD3, CD14, and CD20. Once I've selected these, I now want to select positively for NK cells. I want to select cells which are only NK cells. So for that, I use two different markers, NKP80, which is a marker only expressed on NK cells, and CD56, which is a marker only expressed on NK cells. I select both of those populations, positive, positive, and then I measure intracellular interferon gamma. As I mentioned before, I had also treated the cells with a mixture which allows intracellular staining. So once I've excluded the cells I don't want, T cells, B cells, and selected the NK cells positively, I then zoom in basically on the positive cells and I say, tell me how much intracellular interferon gamma is in here. And then it gives me this graph. So the stuff inside the box, that is basically how much interferon gamma is being produced. As of now, it's about 16.2% against our positive cell line. I can then also do this very cool thing. Since I have 12 different colors, I can then segregate. So if you see this population here, the positive cells, I can separate this on a number of different factors. So here I've chosen the inhibitory receptors, NKG2A, KIR2DL3, KIR2DL1, KIR3DL1, and I have checked to see how many of these cells express these. They divide into 4 different quadrants, and then for each of these quadrants, I've done 2 more here as well. So I have 16 different subsets, and for each of these subsets, I can now measure intracellular interferon gamma. So basically what happens is, from here, for each of the events in here, I can actually acquire all the information I require. And then I get a detailed graph that looks like this. So what happens is, just to go over again, we've isolated, we've co-incubated the NK cells of target cells, and we've stained them, and now we've separated out the NK cells, and we are going to measure all the different interferon gamma responses of these subsets that we've measured. So we start with the graph on the left. So we have a buffer control, which is basically NK cells in the absence of any target cells. We see how much interferon gamma is produced. It's very little, as you can see over here. And then we use K562, which is our control parent cell line. And then we measure the interferon gamma response against this. So we have negative control, positive control. We then measure the interferon gamma response against the target cells, like I mentioned, the ones that I generated, which express the ligand specific to the inhibitory receptor that we're expressing. And we observe that this resulted in a decrease in NK cell response, which makes sense, right? Inhibition is happening. Once we generated these target cells, we then added our biosimilar proteins on top of these target cells, and we measured an increase in interferon gamma response, basically indicating that we successfully masked whatever inhibition this target was causing, and we caused an increase in interferon gamma response against the target. We verified this using a standard antibody as well, and you can see that the biosimilar protein that we expressed actually did respond much more strongly than the antibody that we've chosen, which I've shown here in green. I also studied the studied the repertoire, basically all the different subsets which are expressed within the NK cells, which I showed you over here. You don't have to worry about each of them in detail, but basically NK cells are not identical to each other. There's quite a bit of difference. It's basically a mixture of different cells which express different receptors on their surface. So in order to make sure that all the NK cells were responding when we added the biosimilar protein, we actually divided. So each of these interferon gamma responses, we generated single graphs from each of them. And as you can see, even though the response varies between subsets, there was mostly an overall response. 12 out of 16 restored to about 75% of the level we initially saw. So we saw an NK cell response against the target cells in a vast majority of subsets, and we verified this again using the standard antibody which we used in green, and our response was much stronger than the standard antibody, which means the process of checkpoint inhibition, that is blocking the inhibition that the ligand was causing, was successful. However, this is our control cell line. We then subsequently carried out the exact same experiment using a bunch of different cell lines. So we added firstly, we chose a bunch of myeloma cell lines because my lab primarily specializes in myeloma. So we have the 2 control cell lines in gray, positive controls. We then chose about 4 or 5 myeloma cell lines. So out of these, U266, KMS11, HL16, KMS12 are myeloma cell lines. And the initial response that we saw against them is shown in black. So in black is the baseline response against the myeloma cell line that we chose. We then added the biosimilar proteins, and you can see that the response that happened when we add the biosimilar proteins is shown here in red and in blue. So we basically resulted in an increased response of natural killer cells against target cells. So you have an additive response. So the response basically increases to a level almost matching our positive cells in some cell lines and a little bit lesser in other cell lines. We also tested two cell lines known as BLCL cell lines. These are B lymphoplastoid cell lines as well. They're EBV, Epstein-Barr virus transformed cell lines as well. And as you can see, the NK cells managed to respond against those as well. So we basically managed to use our protein to block the inhibition that NK cells were demonstrating against these target cells and respond quite strongly against these targets. So in conclusion, basically, in the most simple form, the addition of our proteins to target cells, which express the HLA ligand that we were interested in, resulted in an increased missing cell response against targets. We managed to see a difference in response. So in target cells where the NK cells were already able to respond against targets, we managed to increase the response to a very great extent, almost matching our positive controls. In cells with lower initial NK cell response, there was a partial restoration of response. This is most likely because these cells don't express a lot of activating receptors on their surface. But overall, we observed a 1.5 to 5-fold increase in the NK cell response against our target cells, which is basically what we managed to prove with our biosimilar proteins. This basically brings me to the end of the technical section. I just wanted to discuss how this project was created and how the experiments were planned and how the technical protocols were done. In general, just talk about what I learned mainly in this project. This project was very heavily design based. I had to do a lot of data mining because the alleles that I selected, the proteins that I designed, the biosimilars that I generated were all very, very heavily designed before I started the process even. It involved a lot of protein chemistry and immunology, and it involved high parameter flow cytometry, which is one of the most difficult techniques when you're trying to analyze immune cells, because you're basically looking at a very high density response, and you have to be able to tell how much of the response is due to your particular biosimilar, how much of it is due to just NK cells responding against target cells. I also generated a lot of functional assays, protein chemistry, molecular biology. I learned to troubleshoot a lot. Flow cytometry is very finicky, and when you're handling that many lasers, it can go wrong very, very quickly. And I learned a lot of project management skills. And since I have been asked specifically to give you guys a little bit of advice, I don't want to talk like I do everything, but in my opinion, the most important things that have helped me through my career in research are primarily, firstly, a very strong grasp of concepts, because you will not be able to design an experiment if you don't understand what's happening. So you really need to understand the theoretical logic behind why certain things are conducted the way they are, and good technical skills, which is lab-based techniques. The reason I say good technical skills is not to scare anyone, but I think understanding how your experiment works and being able to do a clean, well-executed experiment is hugely important when you want to progress in research. And the main reason I say this is because from my experience, every step on my career has been influenced by skills that I have picked up in the previous step. So I showed you a timeline of my work that looked like this. But if I were to be honest, my timeline actually looked like this. So while I was doing my biotech, right, the most important lab techniques that I learned were actually protein chemistry for my final year project. Since I knew protein chemistry, when I went in to do my master's, I already had that skill set with me, which made me an asset to a lab which was working on antibiotic resistance, because they wanted to express some of the proteins they had in an E. coli system, which is something that I knew back then. So there I learned protein chemistry, I learned antibiotic resistance, and there I also coincidentally happened to learn mammalian cell culture. Now, when I took these skills, these ended up being an asset to the next place that I was employed at, which was Zootor, because I brought in both protein chemistry and mammalian cell culture, and they needed someone to be able to express antibodies in a CHO cell line. There, while I was there, so I brought these skills in, and while I was there, I learned how to express antibodies in a mammalian cell line, which was basically very um, transferable skill set from what I already had. And I learned single color flow cytometry, which is very simple. It's the version where you just have forward scatter, side scatter, and one color. But it's still the fundamental of something that I went on to learn later. So when I went into the immunology core at LSI, what happened is I already brought these skills with me. So when I joined the lab there, I ended up building on the skills that I already had by combining protein chemistry and mammalian cell culture to be able to produce biosimilars in a hex cell line, because I'd already developed a lot of those skills in the previous places that I was at. I then expanded my skill set to protein modification, immunoassays, and multicolor flow cytometry. And I'm now currently in the process of talking to a bunch of places which specifically need people to be able to do things. For example, one of the places I'm talking to is looking for someone with immune assay flow cytometry experience. Because again, when people are looking to fill positions in their labs, they're usually looking to fill a specific role. So if you can already be an asset to that place, it always helps. So always look at your lab skills or your technical skills as and as a resource that you will bring to whichever lab or company or university or whatever else that you join. That's my basic advice. A tiny bit of bonus advice is to give startups a shot. I'm not recommending the one I went to exclusively. I'm actually looking at startups here in Singapore as well, because I really like the way teams are set up there as opposed to large organizations. There's a lot of opportunities to diversify your skills because it's very horizontal structure. There's a lot of room for growth, and the work that's being done there is usually very innovative and fast paced. And the final piece of advice is to be flexible, learn to work on your feet and pick up skills and techniques from your mentors wherever it is that you go. So that's basically my presentation for today. Thank you very much to all of you for listening, and good luck.
Thanks, Ankurina. That was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Is it okay if I stop sharing my screen now?
Yeah. If they have some questions related to that work, then they can ask. Or if there is a general interaction, then it's okay. You can close.
Of course.
So students,
Ma'am,
yeah.
yes, sir, I have.
Okay.
Ma'am, I have certain questions.
Yeah.
Ma'am, first of all, ma'am, in the first slide you mentioned about you have designed the synthetic proteins. Ma'am, did you use the computational approach in order to design or the structural analysis part for designing your synthetic protein?
No, actually, we're making biosimilars. So we had a set of proteins to already begin with. They had to be very similar to the proteins that are being expressed on human cells because we wanted them to be able to compete with those proteins. So instead of a computational approach, we actually started with data mining. So we started by first identifying the alleles of the proteins which are already expressed in humans in different populations, and then selecting the proteins with very high binding abilities and strong biochemical properties.
Okay, okay. And ma'am, what is exactly the weight of the synthetic biosimilars, and what are the parameters you have chosen to create the balance to
Uh,
mimic it?
okay, so the weight, hang on, I think you can see up here in my STS page images. So the base weight of this protein is actually quite small. It's about 27 kilodaltons, 28 kilodaltons. But like I mentioned, we wanted proteins that were modified exactly the way they were modified in the human cells, which is why they were expressed in hex cells. So with the glycosylation and post-translational modification, our proteins measure up to 57 kilodaltons. I didn't have to worry too much. I'm not sure what you mean by balance, but I think what you're talking about is the expression. We did a lot of protein expression in my previous days as well in E. coli. I didn't have to worry too much about the folding and the post-translational, not post, sorry, the folding.
Ma'am, by like sorry for the interruption, ma'am.
Yeah, go ahead.
What I'm trying to say by focusing on the weight, if the weight of the biosimilar is too high, then the binding can interfere with the binding process, right?
Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to say. Since these are biosimilars, right? These are also not very large. Antibodies usually tend to be about 150 kilodaltons, and the ones we have are about 50 kilodaltons, so about one third the weight of an antibody. So we already don't have an issue with it being too heavy. And secondly, it's also folded correctly, so it's also soluble. So you don't really have a lot of the issues that come with expressing very large proteins since it's a biosimilar.
Okay, okay, sure, ma'am. Thank you. Ma'am, one more last question, ma'am. Ma'am, in the flow cytometry, you have mentioned that, ma'am, you have used multiple lasers at a time for a particular cell, for a single cell. Ma'am, is there any chances that these multiple lasers can change the cell chemistry and leads to destroy? So, what are the
Yes.
further optimization carried out for this multiple lasers flow cytometry using, ma'am?
That's actually a very good question.
Okay.
Flow cytometry, there is the lasers don't actually harm the cells because the lasers bounce off the antibodies which are bound on the surface of the cells. But what happens is this is a very harsh process. So flow cytometry can be of two types. One is flow sorting, which is a process wherein you save the cells. In that, you try and minimize the amount of laser exposure and the amount of damage that you expose the cells to. The second kind does not involve sorting. So in my flow cytometry experiments, right, whatever PBMCs I co-incubated with the target cells, they were lost after the experiment. I would analyze, I would check how much NK cell response is there, but after the passing through the sheet fluid and the lasers, there was no way for me to recover them. So these cells basically died. I measure the immune response, and then when I have to repeat the experiment, I actually have to start from scratch. I isolate PBMCs again and incubate them against target cells again. So there's no way of saving these cells actually.
Ma'am, then this could be a major limitation that it cannot reproduce the data.
No. It is reproducible. There are two kinds of replicates. There's technical replicates and biological replicates. So what everyone in immunology does is biological replicates, wherein you make sure the PBMCs are from the same source, the cells belong to the same human being, and you basically re-isolate them multiple times and re-incubate them and ensure that there is biological replication, because it's how drug development works, right? You don't want to make sure that it works only in your system. It has to work repeatedly with immune cells multiple times. So you have to incubate against target cells over and over again and get biological replicates.
Okay, ma'am.
Thank
you
for
so
your
much.
questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is there anything else?
Others, students, general thoughts on the career prospects at Singapore?
It's a bit hard to say because as of now, COVID has complicated quite a lot of things. So right now, a bit difficult because nobody is able to enter or exit the country. Normally, in terms of career prospects, I think with the kind of skill set that we have, a lot of the students will be suited to research positions, labs joining as RAs, or perhaps joining for higher studies in a lot of the educational institutes here. So those they are very happy to welcome Indian students for. In terms of industry, it's a bit difficult to get a footing here if you're entirely not based in Singapore, but it has been known to happen. It's harder. I will admit it's a bit more difficult if your degree is not from here because they don't really know what kind of skill set you bring. But as lab positions, yes, definitely. There are.
But will it come with a cost in the sense, okay, they will get some stipend or they have to, okay, pay for their stay and kind of a thing?
Okay, so if you, in general, just to explain how the degrees in NUS work, the master's degrees, obviously, there are two degrees for master's degrees, wherein you do one is the standard master's degree by academic route, in which case you pay the entire stipend and you go through it, and that's quite expensive, I have to admit, especially for Indian students. But there is a second type of degree, which is called a part-time master's degree, wherein basically you are employed as an RA in your supervisor's lab. So if you contact a lab and they decide to hire you as a research assistant, then you're employed as an RA there, which results in sort of lower fees for you because you're staff. So you will be provided with a stipend for your expenses, and you will be paying a lower fee for the master's course, which is the best option for someone who is planning on joining directly for a master's. Now, since the degree that we do in MVIT is 4 years, actually, we are eligible for a direct PhD as well, which I don't see why not if you can do it. And the PhD program is fully supported. Since you're a graduate student and you're joining under a fellowship, you will receive a monthly stipend. And we have our tuition mainly waived because we do teaching assistantship. I used to teach labs, and if you join, you will have to teach other things as well. So it's a good option because you get to study and you are paid a fellowship and you continue with your education that way.
Yeah, but how much will it work out for the normal masters? You told it is expensive.
If you are a staff member, if you do it part time as a research assistant, I'm not sure exactly how much in terms of number, but you get most of the tuition waived because you are staff. I'm sorry, I don't know the exact numbers, but you pay a very small fraction because you are staff.
Because the students also, they based on the financial situations compare, no?
Yes,
So if they
yes.
want to go to US, maybe okay, it's something they say it amounts to something like 40 lakhs or something like that. So is it equivalent or is it better or lower?
It is not actually. It's lower than the US for sure because
Okay.
there used to be a certain. Again, I'm sorry because COVID has complicated a few things. So this I don't know how much of this will be true right now. But up until the point where I joined, there used to be a thing called a bond, wherein basically if you signed it and the contract basically said that once you have your masters, you have to work in Singapore for about 4 or 5 years so that you contribute to the economy. If you do that, they would cut your fees in half. Half of it would be paid off by the government directly, and then if you're also a staff, then it goes down even much more. So Singapore definitely has a lot of opportunities to support its master's students, but the main thing is you need the support of a prof. And if you were to ask me if you are considering doing a master's, I think our students are good enough to go straight into a PhD program because then that will not cost them anything. If you're joining as a research scholar, you just have a stipend and the tuition is completely waived. So I would definitely recommend going straight into a PhD.
Well, as per that bond, anyway, it may be varying as of now, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
But okay, the jobs are guaranteed that way, is it?
I don't know because they have to attend basically the whole placement process,
Okay.
which most colleges have. So I haven't been through that because I'm a grad student. But it's basically there are higher jobs, and if you are from again a better institute like NUS, for instance, where it is one of the highest sort of educational institutes in Singapore, then there are more job prospects here, obviously, for graduates who are from NUS.
Good. So what is your future plan, Ankurina? You want to continue here or?
Yeah, I'm actually looking to continue here. I'm in talks with a few labs as of now, where I'm planning. There's actually a very interesting startup company here where they want a scientist slash postdoc, where you will be affiliated with the company, but you will also have postdoc positions. So I'm currently in talks with them. I'm in talks with a few other labs which have open postdoc positions. I'm planning on staying here at least for another year or so. Plus, considering the situation in India, I can't travel back also because I'm not allowed to re-enter. So I will be here at least for one postdoc as of
Good.
now.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. I think that's a good option also. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
All the very best.
Thank you so much.
Any
Ma'am,
other thoughts?
ma'am, what is the minimum years of work experience is required for applying directly for PhD?
You don't need a work experience. That is just a
Ma'am,
bonus.
then there will be less chances of getting scholarships, no?
No, so the scholarship process is direct and it does not take into account your work experience. Basically, what happens is you submit all your academic records. So they obviously want very good academic records, they want very good recommendations. You also have to clear minimum GRE, TOEFL, and in my case, I had the bonus of GATE, which really helped. So if you are planning on writing GATE, I would save that because NUS and I think NTU, I'm not 100% certain, will consider if you have very excellent scores during GATE also. Since they have a very high number of Indian students, they understand how competitive a lot of these exams are. So, excellent academic record will actually help you more than job experience, to be honest.
Okay. If that is the case, other way around, if we don't have excellent academic records or something like that.
Definitely, I would say you also have to submit a research proposal since if you want to join either, doesn't matter, master's, PhD, whatever. You have to submit an SOP, a research proposal, and you have to sometimes reach out to profs as well. If you want to do that, then I would recommend working on a very strong research proposal, maybe getting the support of your profs in college, having them give you good feedback, and then reaching out to a few interested profs who are doing similar work in the college and trying to establish a sort of connection, because that can facilitate your application process quite a lot as well.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Ma'am,
Yeah.
I have one question. Ma'am, protein which you have synthesized, how exactly it gonna escape from our immune system, ma'am? Because our immune system think that as an antigen and can can synthesize antibody, right?
I see where you're going from, but it's like I said, it's a happy coincidence. What we've made is a biosimilar, so it looks exactly like a protein that's being expressed on the surface of NK cells already. And when we synthesize it, we make sure we don't synthesize it in anything harmful. So we basically only put it in PBS. So there's nothing in the formulation as well that's harmful. So it's actually not very strongly immunogenic. We've done tests to make sure that it doesn't accidentally cause a response against the NK cells, and we haven't found any response because it's a biosimilar. It looks very similar to proteins already being expressed inside a human. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Now, also you told the molecular weight is so small, the antibody reaction may be very very minuscule, isn't it?
Yes,
That way.
yes, it's
So
very.
it's more like a small molecule kind of a approach.
It is. It's
Yeah.
quite small. It's quite light, and we don't plan on using very large quantities of it as well. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's quite useful that way. Anything else?
Any other thoughts from others who are also there in the meeting?
Students,
Yeah, the talk was for all of you, including us. So I wish there is more interaction.
Any normal questions also are fine.
Yeah.
yeah, you can ask Ankurina about gate preparation because I think, yeah, she has scored 199 All India gate rank that time, through which she got into IIT Kharagpur, right?
Yes, that's correct.
If there are no more thoughts or questions, or whatever is right, then I think we should all join hands and thank Ankurina Sharma for a very wonderful exposition
Thank you so much.
and
And
facilitating this interaction. I'm sure it was very general and useful for the students as well.
thank you so much for.
Thank you, Dr.
Yes.
Rashmi, for the coordination and all the support. Thank you all very much.
Pleasure, sir.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Thank you.
sir.
Thank you, Ankurina.
Thank you,
All the very best
Ankurina.
Thank
for
you,
your
thank you.
future
Good luck to
postdoc
everyone.
prospects.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, keep in touch and kindly share the contact of the Zomator scientist.
Will do. Definitely.
Yeah. So let us explore, and through your contacts, I think we will request for some talks and then facilitation from their end.
Sure. That sounds
Or
good.
maybe you can write a mail to that person with the CC to me, and we can take it forward.
Sure.
Whichever is okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not in touch with him at the moment, but we can see how this goes.
Yeah. Please facilitate.
Yes.
We look forward to your support.
Great. Thank you so much.
All the very best. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Take care.